The downfall of Pixar Studios must be studied. There was a recent viral tweet saying, "What happened to Pixar?" juxtaposing one still from the Incredibles movie, showing this beautiful, happy family, two married parents and their children, quality time. And then on the other side, you see a still from Pixar's Turning Red, which came out in 2022. And this represents the new look of Pixar movies in general. Not only has the art style changed for the worse, if you ask most people, but also the messaging has taken a turn for the worse. You see in the first one, in The Incredibles, you're getting representation. I know that's a loaded word, but you're seeing representation of an intact family unit. We're happy together. And in the second one, you kind of see a representation of this nebulous concept of self-expression and being quirky. And if you don't remember, the story of Turning Red was about a young girl hitting puberty and menstruating for the first time. She's followed around the halls of her school by this personified version of her period, which is a giant red panda.
One of the less than stellar signs for the upcoming Elio is that on top of the $300 million budget.
Thank you.
Hold, please.
We're holding.
Dancing's back.
We're dancing.
Only Tate danced.
What? I'm so disappointed in Aiden.
Aiden didn't dance. I think he might have danced on the first day.
He just got tired of it.
Yeah. But not only is the budget $300 million and it's going to open to like $35 to $45 million, but from what they said, one of the big reasons that it cost so much is it went through multiple director changes and they settled on the director was replaced with the director from Turning Red. So.
Oh, great. Falling upwards, as always. So here were some of the responses. This tweet got up to 42 million views. And there were some people saying they were happy about the change that's taken place at Pixar, despite the, returns showing no one is interested in this new direction they've taken. One Twitter user with a hammer and sickle emoji in their screen name said, "We're coming for white people and the nuclear family. Is that what you want to hear?" So they're just fully mask off at this point.
I mean, that sounds like sarcasm to me.
I mean, I think that they're being genuine.
With just a tinge of yes, but really.
Right, yeah, really. It's just like seeing how far they can take it. Another person said, "White people not understanding Turning Red because it's about an inherently non-white experience." I didn't watch Turning Red, but if I'm understanding it correctly, it was about a girl getting her period for the first time. I don't think that's an inherently non-white experience. But I guess it was considered a huge win for Asian representation or something.
Moana 2 made $1 billion, okay?
Yeah, that's...
Lilo and Stitch is cleaning up at the box office,
right.
Okay?
Right.
It's got nothing to do with that.
Exactly. And none of the themes in Lilo and Stitch or Moana have to do with an inherently non-white experience. That's the key thing to see as to why it's successful. However, there were some people saying they watched the new Lilo and Stitch movie and they thought it drained the original story of its meaning.
Yes, but that doesn't mean it wasn't successful. People were still willing to give it a chance because it's not about race.
Right, exactly. Here were some criticisms of the new art style. I believe they say it's called Cal Arts.
Yes.
I'm not some kind of animation expert, but I am definitely able to recognize it when I see it. And I hate this art style. I think you see it in Steven Universe and Gravity Falls and a lot of newer shows from like the 2010s and onward. But this person replied and said, "Whatever it is, I'm so tired of this crappy bean mouth art style." Their mouths are shaped like a green bean. And Quirk Chungus body language. "I'm fatigued by it and just don't plan on taking my kids to any more Pixar movies until it gets better." And he included a still from Elio to demonstrate that this is just the dominant art style now.
Look, the number one thing that they were pointing out, or that people will point out, is that Pixar went steadily downhill after the exit of John Lasseter, who had to leave because of, we'll just say, under a cloud of accusations. But he was instrumental in films like Toy Story, Toy Story 2, Cars, The Incredibles, all sorts of very, very successful movies. And then, the longer Disney got involved and it got bad. Another thing to remember is that in 2020, Disney wanted to push their animated movies and started releasing all of the Pixar movies on streaming. So Turning Red, Luca, Soul, I believe, was the other. I don't remember what the other one was. But
was it Encanto?
No,
Encanto
went to the theaters. So 3 of them went straight to streaming, and then they embarrassed them further by then re-releasing those 3 movies in theaters 2 years later or a year later, and all of them bombed because it just was past its time, and it was just a further humiliation.
I believe Elemental was a Pixar movie
and
that did relatively well, so but not amazingly.
Well, no. So we brought this up the other day, which is that Elemental had a very weak opening weekend, but much like Mufasa, clawed its way to a higher box office by having strong holds from week to week and not dropping off steadily, 50, 60% the following weekend. And it wasn't the biggest movie in the world, but it was definitely not a failure.
Since you mentioned John Lasseter, I did want to bring up that another one of the viral replies to this tweet was saying it's because they fired this sexual predator and instead started hiring women and people of color. But if you're going to say that the downfall of Pixar is the fault of women and people of color, doesn't that actually make them look bad? And, you have to give him credit regardless of the credibility of any of those allegations. Someone pointed out pretty much every good Pixar movie was brainstormed during a single lunch in 1994 when Toy Story was nearing completion. The entire next 15 years of Pixar was mapped out in one afternoon. Sometimes magic just happens and eventually it dries up.
That is an amazing thing to think about.
Yeah, and that kind of intellectual horsepower just doesn't seem to exist at Disney or any of these other companies anymore.
The guy who wrote and performed Somewhere Over the Rainbow, wrote it in one sitting and then called the guy who ran the studio at 3 a.m. to go record it and record it in one go or something like that. And that's one of the most famous songs ever. Sometimes
creativity just sparks, and sometimes it's from the wrong people. And I think this take from Mally Mouse also gets closer to the heart of the issue, which is not just the art style, but I think the art style changing actually reflects the values of these movies changing and getting worse. I miss when the message of Disney movies was family is everything or work hard, do good. Now it's always just how I feel is more important than anything or anyone. And that's the kind of value that they're trying to imbue in the children watching these movies.
There was another one from Mimetic Sisyphus. Yes. Says the writer and director from The Incredibles is a married father. The writer and directors for Turning Red are unmarried and childless. A father is able to explain the family dynamics from the POV of his son, husband, and father. A single woman can tell her experiences growing up. The story is flatter. It doesn't feel like a family movie because it's not. It's a movie about a kid. I would be willing to bet good money that a % of the parents in the writing room of Pixar has plummeted.
There was
also Brad Bird.
I don't recall if this was a Disney animation movie or a Pixar movie, but do you remember Luca?
Luca was Disney, I think. I don't know.
I don't remember now, but that was another example of a story that kind of demonizes adults and of course is centered around a child protagonist.
It's a Pixar movie.
Yeah, and that movie, Luca, was generally interpreted as an analogy, or not an analogy, an allegory for growing up gay and hiding your identity and your sexual orientation from the adults in your family and being closeted, because it's this little boy who they say falls in love with a sea creature who is another child, but it's not made explicit in the movie.
One of the there's quite a few quote tweets here that are very critical of it.
There's another take about The Incredibles specifically, saying most movies talk about how you can be anyone, not so with The Incredibles. Our heroes are literal supermen who are stronger, faster, and better. At the beginning of the floor, they're shunned by society into hiding out of petty resentment and jealousy. Do they do what society tells them to do? No. Bob is unhappy as a normal schmuck and desires greatness. He sneaks out at night with his buddy to do what he was born to do. In the office, he's shown to be a slave. His midget boss tries to bully him, and what does he do? He throws him through a wall. His wife tries nagging and browbeating him into being normal. She tries to make him conform. Does he listen? Not at all. In fact, she later turns out to be wrong about this. And then they talk about the villain in The Incredibles, Syndrome. Mm-hmm. He's a total loser nerd who uses his intelligence to make up for his lack of powers to enact his revenge on all of the heroes. He is a resentful nerd with a big chip on his shoulder because he wasn't born super. He says, quote, "And I did it without your precious gifts, your oh-so-special powers. I'll give them heroics. I'll give them the most spectacular heroics anyone's ever seen. And again, when everyone is super, no one will be. Syndrome wants to make everyone equal. He uses cheap tricks and gimmicks to try to win over the people. So what happens? Does brain power beat brawn? Nope. The climax of the movie is the genetically superior heroes publicly humiliating the villain and then throwing him into a jet engine. The end." And that says all you need to know about the character and depth of the people writing Pixar movies back in the 90s and 2000s compared to present day. They don't have the intellectual capacity or the moral framework to even write a story with that amount of truth that resonates with people. Even if on the surface level they don't know why it resonates with them and why they like it so much, that is the reality of it, because it communicates truth.
This one says John Lasseter left. Look, history has evidence that horrible people can make the best stuff. Literally, just look at how we got most of the technology and art today after World War II. Heck, you might hate your contractor, but he's the best there is at building a long-lasting house. So,
yeah. And that's what I was trying to say about Dan Schneider as well. As controversial as it was for me to say, he made all of the most successful shows at Nickelodeon, despite being a piece of shit. He was just the wrong person to be front-facing. And, of course, more was found out about him through the Quiet on Set documentary. There were other people at Nickelodeon who were leagues worse than Dan Schneider himself, who are less famous. But again, people bring this up with Harvey Weinstein as well. They make jokes about the type of leading actresses we have these days compared to back when Harvey Weinstein and his ilk ran Hollywood. There's been a clear change in who you see on screen and what they look like, because I guess this like casting couch culture. I mean, I don't even think reportedly put to rest.
I don't even think it has to necessarily be talked about in the realm of like what they look like, but in general, there's so much content being made now, and the market has been so heavily saturated that there is a good chance, a better than average chance, that the person you're going to be watching in some role just isn't going to have the charisma or the it factor. And some of that might even be of its own design, where it's like 20 years ago, maybe they didn't even have that charisma or it factor, but just by virtue of being chosen for something in a market so narrow that you assume that they were better than they are. And a lot of times perception is reality. But now you're like, okay, there's 10. Have you seen the stuff they put on Tubi? Like the Tubi originals? It's insane. Like there's so much stuff being made, and the talent is so dispersed amongst so many different networks and streaming services and theaters and all this stuff, that you don't realize that how good you had it back in the 90s when every movie coming out was from somebody that ended up being a legend, because at that time there just wasn't as much stuff getting made.
And there wasn't this attitude that, you know, you have to give an underdog director a chance either.
Yeah.
Just because of, you know, their skin color or gender.
Well, we were even talking the other day, like I was watching, I brought it up on the show the other day, but I was watching a something from Film Threat where they said, why are all these Marvel movies being directed by TV directors? Because Marvel wants to control them. They don't want to hire a visionary director who's actually got an idea for what he wants the story to be. Marvel wants the story to be what they want it to be, and that's going to be by design as cookie cutter and as corporatized as it can get, because it's being done by Kevin Feige in committee rather than hiring a Jon Favreau or a Sam Raimi or a Shane Black in the early days of Iron Man. All of these, Kenneth Branagh, even by and large Taika Waititi, who brought his own flair to Thor, whether you liked what he turned it into or not. Like, there's just too much content. There isn't enough, there isn't enough widespread talent to make up for the fact that the stuff being made today, on top of having mediocre writing, doesn't have the talent to back it up.
Yeah, and to bring it back to Pixar, I don't think this is just a Pixar problem. That much is obvious. We watched Wish. I think that was...
I agree
was Wish 2023 or...
2020, end of 2022?
I think it was end of 23.
It was the 100, yes, 2023, because it was the 100 year.
Yeah, and that was a Walt Disney animation movie, not a Pixar movie, but it was literally Marxist propaganda. It was nihilistic, atheistic, communist, Marxist propaganda for children. And the complete opposite, narrative-wise, to what I just described about The Incredibles, where Princess Asha is Syndrome. And Princess Asha is fulfilling the same role that the villain Syndrome fulfilled in The Incredibles, where she wants to force everyone to be equal. Yeah. And she resents the king for having power over the people and being in a position where he can decide whose wishes are granted.
In the chat, somebody said, all horrible directors and people. Well, I can't speak to, much like the discussion about John Lasseter, we're not having a discussion about whether these are great people. We're talking about whether they're great artists. And
what leeway do you give them in order to make money?
Because another one you could add to that list from Marvel is James Gunn, who is, plenty of people look back at those tweets and they're like, I don't know if I like this guy. Yeah. But to say that he didn't make Guardians of the Galaxy extremely relevant and then go on to even more success, Joss Whedon, the original Avengers director, who was extremely successful in television with Buffy the Vampire Slayer and going on to do so much work in Hollywood after that to take on the Avengers role as director. And look, Kenneth Branagh as a director, I don't necessarily think that calling him a bad director is accurate, though I do like him more as an actor. The point of it is that the market is oversaturated, and especially when you get to those ones who may not have the kind of intellectual capability to write and interpret art that you're going to, not just the actors, but the directors and the people writing the stories, is you're just not going to have that quality. I think a better example, and I saw a tweet about it, so I'm kind of taking from this guy's idea. I think a better representation of Pixar decline, if you were to ask the audience, would be Lightyear.
Oh, yeah.
Given the change in the look of, like the dramatic change in the look of the character, the decision to change the actor from such a beloved role, that might be a more indicative, because that was actually a rebuke of Tim Allen and what the character was to begin with, to change it and give it context that it never needed.
Right. And if Pixar is going to have any sort of revival back to its former glory, they're just going to have to cough out whatever else is on the slate from this holdover. Everyone's talking about the holdover content that was made before the vibe shift, and we're to expect a turnaround in the next few years after these studios release what they had in the hopper before the vibe shift. Yeah. And then they can finally start getting back to making content people actually want to see. But honestly, I doubt that they will, because they just don't have the wisdom to.
Thanks for watching. Listen to full episodes of Pop Culture Crisis on Spotify.
Keep up with us on social media and make sure you subscribe and ring that bell so you never miss the show. Bye, guys.